she does.
She's Sailor Saturn?
Haven't seen Sailor Moon.
Mm.
That's one of the classic animes I really want to watch.
It's good.
I really want to watch like all of the very popular classic animes.
Well,
like,
you'll
the
need a year to
80s
sit down and binge that.
You want to join me?
Why not get Tyler and Candace and make a series out of it?
Join me. And we can become one.
In our classic anime binge.
Assimilate.
We also gotta watch the boxing one Stefan likes.
I would box you, Stefan. Right in the Teletubbies.
You're gonna box me in the Teletubbies?
That's not...
Kinky.
Well, technically the podcast hasn't started yet, but...
Oh my god.
This is the pre-show.
Pre-show.
Stefan.
Yeah, like...
The short that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
Caboose named it the Teletubbies.
I'm happy about that.
The Teletubbies.
What's the name of the Teletubby names?
Tinky Winky, Dipsy, Lala, and Poe.
Poe?
Poe!
Just one of these things doesn't belong here. That's not how that goes at all.
Pretty much. Not at all.
Oh,
So.
I forgot the camera's over here.
That's an interesting setup.
I was looking at the...
I get the executive chair.
You're also covered by the live. Well, on our view, the live.
Yeah, we'll see it, and that's the one.
I know, that's
yeah,
it.
So, there you go. It's not like we've...
This is the guy's bench.
I didn't say anything misogynistic.
Well, it's because I'm the one that's going to get beaten up by her. She's been physically harming me.
Yeah, look at those four
And
scratches
this
on
is
his
not
eye.
a live podcast.
Can we
If
get...
you guys want to, hey, if you give us a like if you want to see her throw an egg at me.
Not...
I still owe 2 eggs on your head from that Facebook post. I haven't forgotten about that.
You know, it's funny, Tyler. There's a lot of people are asking me today. It's like, man, what happened to your face? And I'm just like, her. She got mad at me.
Like, no joke. You know, we came in from walking the dogs around, and all of a sudden, like, you guys were already inside the house, and walking in to see your face the way it was, I immediately got like, what the hell did my dogs just do?
No, it's great. Because we're at Winter Fair today, and there's face paint. I was like, oh, I really want to do something cool. And I was like, oh, can you do this? And like, she didn't see any options. Like, she had this thing of scratch marks, like a picture. I was like, can you do that? It took like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
It was $5.
Yeah.
I was like, so I gave her 10. I was like, this is good.
Okay, for a second I thought you were getting mad.
Yeah,
Like,
no, when it was
like-
fresh, she had like all this highlighting, all this detailing. She had like the white highlighting going to, like, it looked good. And then Brandon's been sitting there, oh no, makeup, oh no, makeup.
It's hard. I itch, and so I'm like,
Babe.
this is a good job.
When you itch,
I'm
tap.
trying to, but I just want to mention on this side.
Can we get a sign and like tape it to your back instead it says "Don't kick me"? It says "No girls allowed." It's like written in crayon.
On my butt?
No, on your back. You know how it says "Don't like kick me" aside from like playgrounds and
Did
stuff?
that happen to you?
No.
Do we need to talk about it?
No, any of these talks that we have with Mason, we wind up learning things that are either somewhat uncomfortable or we're sitting there in awe as far as like, okay, that actually happened to you?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's just funny when you look at me like that's the fun. It makes me laugh.
Boob
Every
jobs.
Yup. Which explaining that one again over to Josh was fun. So, yes, welcome to episode 163 of the Crack Brain Podcast. I know that if you are here for the live stream, super last minute, it was one of those where we were sitting down getting ready to go and do the camera is over there! We were like sitting here getting everything set up, and then I was like, why don't we live stream it? So I know we've been off of live streaming for a while. That's my fault.
I miss it.
Yeah,
It was fun.
it is really fun. It's just
but
fun.
it did have its cons.
Wait, what?
It had its cons.
Yeah.
Like negatives, you know? Like conventions.
You
My
lost me on that
frustration
one.
for you has not ebbed at all. You don't get to say anything.
I didn't, I just
You're
made noises.
Yeah, it's like you're actively still in a relationship with it. I will point this out.
With it?
I'm an it boy.
one of the
That's only for if you get to watch the live stream or if you're watching the YouTube version.
So I don't know if
This
you
little shimmy.
I don't know if you ever noticed this, but did you know that when Brandon laughs really hard, his face goes and doesn't move?
Yes.
I just noticed that today. See? Your body has a seizure, but his face stays the same.
I didn't notice that.
Because I don't even remember what you're doing, but we were both sitting on my bed, and I'm putting lotion on my feet, and you're just laughing, and I'm looking, I'm like, it reminds me of that meme that's making fun of people, and it's that kid's face that's like, I'm like, it's that exact same face almost.
Yeah, it's not wrong. Or when he finally like has an idea and he's getting ready to unload it on everyone, and he'll sit there and do the basically a kid way too overeager that he's like, I'm making a treat.
Spit take. No, seriously, like I've wanted to do one of those like spit, like make you laugh spit
Yes.
challenges.
It wasn't
I know
a-
Ray wants to do it, and
It wasn't a spit take, it was a snot take almost.
because I've seen some of those and they are just terrific. Like I would just do like simple one take, see how funny we can make it.
So what you're telling me is that I can be unceremoniously funny to you all and see who I can make like cry and spit and all of that.
You know I'm just gonna walk out naked.
No.
That'd make anyone spit take.
Why is your response of like comedy naked?
Because it's funny. It's a dingling.
I'm never taking you to a stand-up show. Alright? And most people, they clap. All of a sudden, you're going to be the one idiot that's going to be like, such a great show! It's fantastic! And start unbuttoning everything.
No. You don't do it just like as a striptease. You just do it as a surprise. They're not expecting it, and that's what a spit take
is?
No, you don't do striptease. Like you just come out full blast, and that's the spit take. Not just all of a sudden just like they're doing this and they swallow, or some people might like fan themselves a little bit.
Have you ever thought about writing a book about the rules of comedy?
I don't know the rules.
Obviously.
I'm sitting here trying to wrap my head around the fact of you as the audience member stripping at a show.
Stefan,
Yes?
we're talking about the guy that lifts his shirt and shows his nipples at random intervals during the day.
You're not wrong. It is very concerning.
I have
Keep
two
your hands
nipples.
where they are. I will hit you so hard.
You're threatening abuse, and he's just like, it's okay, just awkwardly holding his
There's
hand.
no man where you get hit.
But to the threat of what you could possibly just...
She's been threatening to cut my balls off.
I don't want to phrase this.
No, keep going. I want to see how you do this.
Phrase my balls getting cut off.
Your relationship still scares me.
I don't want kids.
Is that the solution? I feel like there's a few others, but you know.
So
Well, cut them off, cut the tubes. It's the same either way.
Is it?
something's getting cut and removed. That's basically just the gist of that.
My friend Kat posted this joke. It was like a DIY vasectomy for wives. And she posted it and she's like, hey, is this a Christmas present for Brandon? I was just like, I love this. And then some guy was like, oh yeah, give it to your wife for Christmas. She'll love it. Great surgery. And I was like, hey, I'm not a wife yet, but if he's really concerned about a seamstress doing surgery, then there's something I need to tell him.
Yeah.
I don't like the words "do it yourself" and "surgery" next to each other.
But I'm a seamstress. I put things back together. Or rip them apart. Depends on what
Oh,
happens. Seam rippers.
You cannot be a person that puts creation and destruction right next to each other in a sentence and going like, this is me. It's fantastic, huh?
Wait, hold on. Full Metal Alchemist. Creation and destruction.
Stefan.
What?
Hurricane.
Which is basically nature's wrecking ball.
Exactly. And it
that.
destroys civilizations, and it's fantastic because we need another plague.
And there's no creation to it.
It creates chaos.
That's
not-
not the...
That's anarchy.
No,
Yeah, like Full Metal Alchemist, you got
Destruction.
destruction. and creation.
You all still scare the crap out of me.
That's not a tornado, though.
As you all can see, we haven't been around each other in a hot minute. Don't you?
You're slapped.
I
into
got
the live stream.
slapped.
You did. You
And
did.
Ace's first like, you're warm. What do you think she snuggles up to me at night?
And take up 3/4 of the bed.
Seriously, like last night.
Were you
I had-
cheated?
No, so I got her a weighted blanket for her birthday, and part of the solution was that she can't steal it because it's too heavy. And it's worked.
Are those nice? I think I get one.
Yeah, it's kind of messed with my sleep schedule trying to reset stuff, but it's...
No.
Sorry.
If it's a true homage to Ebb, we all do it on 3.
What's Ebb?
1, 2, 3.
I think I did it wrong.
Brandon,
That was my first dab.
Ed, I'm a goblin!
I still have to edit.
You do, you
that
do.
part I have.
But,
I just saw that. Yeah, because I got a video when we were at Disneyland.
We were in
met up
Galaxy's
with Ebb and Ray. And she was just talking and was like,
No,
how
Ed
did that
was...
happen?
We were in Galaxy's Edge. We'd, like, just walked out of the... we were by Docking Bay 7. But she's just squatting on, like, a table or a chair outside, and she just goes, I'm a goblin! And Brandon got a video of it. It's, like, 7 seconds of blessing.
Yeah.
It's literally Ebb in 7 seconds.
This is why I really cannot wait to go and actually meet Ebb.
Oh, Ebb and Ray are darling.
Yeah, because we've talked a little bit, you know, like through Twitter and all of that and whatnot, and I'm actually really looking forward to actually going over to RTX because I've got a bunch of RTX plans, but then also just the fact that, like, there's a couple things that I've told Ebb about how, like, what I'm going to be doing with Tucker, and then other
Tucker did
things
it.
I am not telling her at all.
Hey, Ebb, I will give you a tub full of props. You can do as you wish when you meet Tucker.
Stay away from my bum. Stay away from my
A
bum.
washing tub of props.
No, I'll get, shoot, why am I having a brain
Max.
fart? I'll get Max for that. So Max is another guy we met.
He's part of RT Seattle.
Okay.
So, he was in our
We
Sam
met-
Ireland video. He had the one, like, the really cool, office
Yeah, he
setting.
was wearing the Nora
The
Boop gear.
green. So he does,
workout gear.
washing tub cosplay.
And it's so fun.
He is awesome.
What is washing tub?
I'm sorry, Ab, I won't give you anxiety. Just ignore me.
But Washing Tub, in Caboose's mind, he is Agent Washing Tub, and he yells, "Freelancer powers activate" every time he leaves an area. It's just Caboose's impression of Wash. And he's
Oh,
Agent Washing
okay.
Tub instead of Washington.
I get you.
Yeah. So we had a friend that cosplayed Agent Washing Tub, and he carried around this incredible journal. And then
It
in
was
the-
a journey.
Well, it was a journey too, but it was also a journal. But,
Journal.
And then,
We got a picture, we autographed it.
yeah, we autographed it, but then he also incited a mass circle of people screaming, "Come on, Carolina," with the music playing. Standing in a circle around me, and I'm trying not to break character, and I'm laughing too hard not to.
That was great.
It was blessing.
RTX is fun.
Yeah. There's now enough with this year over in RTX that I'm losing my goddamn mind. So it's gonna be great. But you know, in one thing that we've definitely forgotten already in true cracked brain fashion is that things have transpired over the last, some of us weeks, some of us not and whatnot. How have y'all been?
Well,
put the word out of my
mouth. She's running from something. What?
What?
I don't know. Her nose is running, and that's what
This
came
air-
into my
this
head.
air
Okay.
is making my nose
So
drain.
Salt Lake Valley is the worst air in the nation for like the whole week.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I don't watch the news, so I don't know anything about
Do
it.
you go outside and breathe?
I work outside.
Same
I'm a
with
law
me.
attendant.
So like the reason why my face is so red is the weather, pollution, and all that stuff. So Which
Good
you said
show.
you were getting me masks. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they'll be here Monday.
So I'm gonna have some masks just so I can
They're
breathe
the
better.
N95s.
Because normally I have like just a face shield or something. Because the air is so bad. It's complete Silent Hill
Really?
up in
It's-
Bountiful. Yeah.
I walked from my car to my office building, and my eyes are dry and my throat is burning.
yeah. With
So I
that,
had
with
that
that,
headache for like a good
that could be
week or
part of
something.
it too.
Yeah,
Um,
I've
need to
had more
start-
headaches because of it.
Maybe I need to start wearing a face shield when I work or
What's up,
something.
Brandon? Not that Brandon.
Yeah. So that's a like freaking bad inversion.
Yeah.
I'm about ready to quit my job, but that's I say that every
You're
day.
saying
Every
He
day,
says it
but,
every week.
like
I get,
literally, this has just been breaking my back.
no, I literally get texts. I swear, every Monday and Wednesday, I'm gonna quit my job. Friday is the last day. I'm absolutely done with it right now. Blah, blah, blah. Friday comes, Friday goes, Sunday. You still work there? Yeah. Thought you were gonna quit. Oh no. Monday and Wednesday. Oh, I hate this job so much. Literally, it's a cycle. Like,
your quitting your job should really almost be like an incident chart where we
You want me to,
track the
0
amount of
days till Brennan's threatened to leave his job.
I just say you want to do the amount of incidents that make me want to leave my job every day.
then just do it.
I don't have a job lined up.
Well,
The hardest part is getting the like people that see my resume are like, man, you got a really good resume, but I can't get a freaking interview anywhere.
Welcome to what I was dealing with, and then I chose my own route.
Yeah, and then it's like, oh yeah, I get an interview, and they're like,
Stefan.
and jeez, and
He can't keep his car clean long enough, and he hates the general public.
hey
the
Oliver,
general public, the specific public. Specific public is fine.
okay, Oliver, you know how bad the Silent Hill gets here in the valley.
It's horrible this time.
and it's been bad.
Okay, here's the way I go and I feel about it and whatnot. Is every year, every Utahn says the exact same thing about the air, and it's not that
I'm not gonna leave.
I'm not saying that it's one of those where it's like, oh my god, like the air quality is not that bad. No, it's bad. My thing about it is that it's nothing different from like when I lived over in Southern California. We just got used to, like, I didn't realize that the horizon wasn't brown until I moved here. I just thought that was a thing, because even when I was living in Japan, same thing. And
I'm here to
whatnot.
tell you, though, the difference I've noticed. I was in China for 2 weeks in 2008.
Yeah.
The air quality is crap, but it doesn't taste bad like the air does here.
The only reason why I think it's not that bad is because we still go through a spring and summer when it clears up.
Yeah.
Where everywhere else, it's one
constant.
of those where it's constant. So that's my thing of like, it's like, it's constant. And then the fact that over here during the winter it gets colder, so warm air is going to sit even longer rather than actually rising. So all that inversion is just going to hover down low until it can finally go out.
So for those of you that don't know Utah's scape, especially Salt Lake, we have the Rocky Mountains here, and then littler mountains called the Ochre. Acts like a fishbowl and traps all the crap in here, and then if either a giant windstorm or rain or snow, whatever comes in,
Or if I
pushes it
pass
out.
gas.
That makes it
You
worse.
see the entire valley just all of a sudden clear out. Brandon's been here.
And then you just hear, ah! And that's me
I
dying.
feel better.
So when weather happens, it clears out the.
Yeah, so like if the wind gets strong enough to like push it over the mountains or just disperse it.
notice these things.
I don't. I'm just having a good time, and everyone's like, "Man, the world sucks." I'm like, "It does."
I wish I was like you still.
I'm telling you right now, I have a feeling that during like an Armageddon-like scenario, everything is going to be on
that
fire.
zombie! His makeup looks cool. Oh, that's not makeup. Oh, we better run now.
No, everything's on fire. He's going to be like, oh, outdoor barbecue. I'm going to go make s'mores.
For what?
It's kind of warm, don't you guys think?
Like, I really want to have your blind optimism and like view on the world. But then again, like
Yeah,
my,
just
my
skeletons.
sense of dread is what
Stefan.
keeps me alive.
His sense of world view is what mine was before my parents divorced. Then, or no, even like what? Probably 5 years ago, and then I just started going like, I hate everything.
Getting closer to
My
your
parents
30s.
divorced when I was like 3.
See, mine divorced
3.
10 years ago about.
Some form of word.
3.
Man, Brandon, have you lost weight? You're just a skeleton.
For a second, I thought you were really asking him, and I was all like,
I don't know. I haven't weighed myself in a while.
His bald spot is growing back though, so he might weigh a little bit more.
I don't know. Am I chubbier or am I muscular more or am I the
No,
same?
you lost a bit of muscle and did gain a little bit of chonk, but your chest is looking better. I look at these things.
He's got pecs.
Don't.
You missed
did
this.
it. You-
You missed
Oh, you
this.
can't see it. There we are.
Okay, no. Speaking of this, all right. So earlier this week, I wound up shooting an info. So again, for those of you that might not have listened or anything like that, I quit my job and I now act full time. You know, for the most part. So,
Word.
shut up.
Hey, I'm just
Good.
quoting April here.
It's good. Alright, it pays bills. Alright. But yeah, so like earlier this week I did an infomercial on an upcoming workout machine where I can't say what the product is actually named, but basically you stand on this like little board and it seriously just vibrates up and down. It's the shake weight of like it's like it literally looks like a surfboard shake weight. All right, it is stupid how this thing looks and how it operates and things like that, but it actually does kind of work.
Did you use it to get in shape for the commercial?
No,
I can't wait till the South Park episode of it.
it's okay. I'm actually very much afraid of that because it's one of those where like when we're there, they're sitting there like, okay, we'll get onto it, and then you know at one time they have us just hero posing on it, just sort of like standing there while they're going around in a circle. So basically, it looks like I'm just like constantly shaking my butt the entire time.
I mean, you
Yes.
do that though?
Alright, yeah, but I do that for fun, not because I'm getting paid. Alright? When someone is filming you and the entire room is silent and going like, that's a nice butt jiggle. Alright? There's something just a little weird about it.
I think that's gonna happen in some of our future
You're not wrong.
videos that we have planned. Is that's a nice butt.
I do it
Yeah.
for fun, not to get paid. Stefan Watson, 2019.
That's how we end 2019. Do things for fun, not to get paid.
And there goes our
Clearly!
Secret of life. Probably.
So,
I don't know.
But yeah, like it went from that to like then also having to go do them with weights and whatnot. I posted one video online. There are a couple other videos that I refuse to go and post because it's like it looks like I'm sitting like there's one where I'm doing dumbbell flies real quick and it looks like I'm having a trying time taking a poo. All right, and my legs just happen to be shaking. It's like and then I like smile. I'm like.
While someone's lifting weights, smile.
Like when you
What did they tell you?
when you first showed me that clip, I was like going, are you struggling to do a squat? That's what I thought. And then it took me a second. I was like, oh, the board is moving up and down. I was like, you're doing like an infomercial for workout gear, and you're looking like that. I'm like, well, are you out of shape, Stefan?
That and it's the fact that like okay, so when I did that video, that's also after they'd made us do. It was me and another guy. They had us do a bunch of other squats without weights and a bunch of push-ups. And the way it would go, like we're sitting there, they'd be like, okay, and action, just start doing your push-ups. We're sitting there doing push-ups, and then it's like, okay, this thing's vibrating. This is all right. And then all of a sudden, I'd be counting like I'm at 25. And I'm still sitting there going, it's like, are you going to, oh yeah, cut. It's like, okay, we did that like 9 times. So by the time we finally got to the weights, we're like, let's get the weights. Both me and the other actor were sitting there looking at each other like, so I've already done 250 push-ups and over 700 squats. So I'm like, we're sitting there like with these, like some of them with dumbbells, some of them with kettlebells, and we're sitting there trying to do this and like, make it look easy.
Wait, did they actually give you real weights, not fake
Those
weights?
are real weights. That kettlebell was 35 pounds.
Like you could have.
I don't know what that is, but
It looks like.
It looks like a cannonball with a handle.
neat.
Yeah.
So, Mason,
Yes.
Speaking of squats, you weren't here when I was talking about this. I got back on my workout routine the other night, and I was sitting there doing the squats that he told me to do, and I'm looking, and Delta is literally on his perch doing this. Every time I go in sync with me, I was trying to get him to do it last night, and he was just staring there like, what are you doing? I'm like, you know what these are, you were doing them.
Doing some delta squats.
He was literally squatting with me. It was hilarious.
Okay. That's awesome.
And that's my workout story. That's not as cool as yours.
Yeah, look, working out is something where it's like, it sucks to be able, like, it sucks to do.
But you feel so good
but
after it.
Like, you just feel accomplished afterwards. You're like, yes, I
See,
feel
at
awesome.
first, like that night that I started to back up, I was like ridiculously depressed over just like everything. Did we freeze?
For a second,
Oh, okay.
it froze and it was like, all of a sudden, boop. I was like, all right.
Is our audio still going or?
No, yeah, audio is still going to be
offline.
going.
Okay.
Yeah,
Audio is offline.
Yeah, it's gonna be a little bit of
Wait,
thing,
I
and
think
basically it's
like-
just the fact that now that 7:15 has happened, everyone is all getting online at the
Oh,
same
yeah.
time, and we found out that like all of our neighbors decide to go and watch Disney Plus all at the same time right before their kids all go to bed, so our internet dies at like 7:00.
Oh, okay. But so I was just like super depressed that night, and so I was just like I stress cleaned our like room on the side where I store my armor, because I'm like, there's just so much crap in here. There's like trash boxes, stuff that hadn't been put away. So I was going through that, and I was going so hard at it that I didn't notice my phone died.
Is that why you weren't talking to me?
Yeah. Because I was also I was stressing the hell out, man. I mean, you know how I get with clutter. But, anyways, and so I sit down and I get on YouTube, and I'm just listening to music while I'm trying to make sure, you know, like, oh, I see a USB thing. Is it empty or is it full? You know, stuff like that. I'm sitting there and I put on Reverse Blue music, and I look down and I just see the word singularity. I was like... So I go through, I find the album, the whole season 16 and 17 album is on YouTube now, and I guess apparently Spotify.
Yeah.
I found that one song from that one fight that I cannot stop crying over in season 17. I found the backing music behind it, which is what I've been waiting for since that episode aired, because it was so good. And I said, you know what? Fuck it! I got it! So I went into my bedroom and worked out with that
There's
song
our
playing.
Explicit
and-
warning.
Yep. One of them, still PG-13.
This is for you older kids.
But I was literally so pumped, and I got down and I'm like, oh, I feel good. I feel like I can take down an entire army of Texans. Yeah! And then I went to bed.
In your
For
dreams.
that 5 minutes, you must have felt awesome.
Oh, I felt fantastic. Like, it's probably the best I felt all week, because I was like, yeah, I worked out, I can feel the burn, it sucked, but I can still do it, and I'm not dying. The planks sucked, but those always suck.
Yeah.
And I hate you for prescribing those. But,
Sure, I'm gonna prescribe you a plank.
no,
Nom nom nom
4
nom.
rounds of 30-second planks. And I'm like, those are horrible. I hate those. My boobs hurt. Really, it's my pecs, but, you know, extends to the entire boob.
I didn't hurt at all.
The
We're
Carly
not from that.
story.
Yeah, but no, I felt like so flippin' empowered listening to that music and sitting there doing squats, because, like, I'm all focused. I'm like, I'm gonna kick ass. I'm gonna be the hottest Carolina at RTX next year. And then
You
I fell
were the
asleep.
one the year
Yeah.
before and the year before that.
This lets
That
you
is
know
like the
that you're
biggest
going.
compliment you've ever given me.
What? What about this hi beautiful? Hi,
You
so
were kissing
pretty.
ass something wrong. I
I
know it.
didn't do anything wrong.
No, okay, he texts me, what, Tuesday and Wednesday. Hi, beautiful. Hello, highlight of my life. Hello, my angel. Like, you know, after he gets off work, the
good
first
time.
thing I ask him, what did you do? What did you fuck up? Stuff like that. He's like, I didn't do anything. Can't I just compliment my girlfriend?
I asked
And I'm
for
like-
the. Give it to her and it's instantly wrong.
It's because it's weird because you never do it, so I automatically think you did something
And I
wrong and you're
got
kissing my ass.
so
for
much
it.
crap for it that I stopped again doing it because
And
like,
now
oh,
we're
it's
back to the
that.
60-year-old bitter married couple. Excuse me.
She still's the
I
blanket.
fostered this in some way.
Yep.
It's your fault.
Don't you touch me.
Remember that one morning you picked her up from you picked me up from her house when we went to Nevada.
California. Tahoe. Yeah, he was like,
I'm
I
sorry,
think we could go
Sophia.
another 6. months without it.
I'm always bummed that it's one of those where it's like I got and lost a drinking buddy in the course of a month. So.
No, it's like we go back to the 2018 interview video, and I put something in there that was never aired. It was the February vodcast, Crack Tube vodcast.
Oh, that
It was January, February, where I'm sitting there trying to get the last few drops of whiskey, because I get the last few sips, and I'm trying to drop it, and Carly hits my head, and the drops go in my eye. And we're sitting there trying to talk about wizarding days.
I didn't hit, I just kind of like, because I wanted it to go up his nose, so I thought if I bounce his head up, it'll go back down further. It went in his eye.
Yeah.
And he was squealing like a child, and it was hilarious.
I don't imagine alcohol in the eye is very pleasant.
Not at all.
Would you like to find out?
It was.
I really don't.
It was honey whiskey.
Sure?
Yeah, it was honey.
I'm old enough to get wasted, but no.
I want to get chocolate wasted.
You still just saying I'm old enough to get wasted scares me.
I'm 22.
Yeah.
Baby.
Watch out, world. No. I'm kind of still lagging a bit.
Yeah, so I'm just letting I'm letting the
Letting it go.
internet kind of do what it's gonna do. and
But if you want to see it, just on Wednesday.
I'm not recording it. It's just
Oh,
a
you're
stream,
not?
so it'll be credited regardless.
Yeah. No,
So-
cruddy.
Yeah.
And then never mind.
Yeah.
Wednesdays is the Crack Brain
Wednesday's
podcast.
my-
So make sure that you listen in, and then I know that I've kind of mentioned it a little bit over on the intros, but there will be some changes starting over in January. So it'll be one of those where, like I said, you're going to. We're still figuring out what exactly is going to go on with the Crack Brain podcast, whether it's going to drop down to twice a month or if it's still going to be every week, but you're still going to, Call Acast is going to stay the same. We're going to do another podcast. We're going to be doing this one, and then next week we start actually filming one of the things I've been waiting to actually film for, the last 2 months. I cannot wait for this. I swear to God.
Wait, do I know what it is?
Do I know?
I need to make sure I get my SIM card back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I need to get my 128 back, or I can just order another one.
Yeah, that, and I've got some other equipment that will be coming your way soon.
Does it go kaboom?
What?
No. One does make really, really loud noises, though.
Louder than my farts?
Very much so.
Your fart is not a measurement of unit.
No, it is. It's a...
No, it is.
Because I will fart and wake my bird up in the middle of the night.
I have put my bird to bed when he's spending the night. Brandon will rip one, and I hear Delta go, "Stop! Stop it!"
Your bird says stop to anything.
No, he doesn't.
Says no to everything you do.
No, because I took my bird over early one week because
Okay,
I think I was gonna have a really late Friday, so I was want to take the bird down, and she's in the morning getting ready and in the other room, and you can hear my bird. My bird's in early morning, always talks, going, "Wah!" And then you hear Delta, "Stop, Wah! Stop, Wah! Stop."
Because my bird's like me, an asshole and a night owl. And I am not a morning person. I roll into work. Sometimes I sit down and forget to say hi and good morning. And then my coworkers are like, "Is Carly okay?" And I'm like, "I'm here." And they're like, "Oh." And I was like, I probably should have said hi when I walked in. My brain's not working. I mean, they still love me, but one of them does.
It's like they still love me. They'll deal with it.
Yeah. And so, literally, I'm sitting there getting ready in my bathroom, and I can hear this bird 2 rooms away.
You got the A-star rating.
That's something. I am Yeah, I guess I can say I'm an Uber Diamond driver.
Oh, that
so,
was the,
yeah.
the thing is diamond.
Yeah, so like I'm their top level of drivers and all that kind of stuff. So I get all kinds of like little perks and.
So basically an overachiever.
Is your jackalope still in the car?
No, Jackalope is over there, I think.
I
Yeah.
see him.
Jackalope is somewhere here.
Here's
Jackalope is
Jackalope.
hiding. May, hello.
I don't
May.
know. Hi, May.
One of the popular RVB fan artists.
Aha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
May, this is the Tucker coming to RTX with me.
more specifically, I'm the Marrow that's coming to RTX.
They know he was Tucker.
Oh, they know me as.
Because I'm in a goddamn RVB soda chat.
Yeah.
Lavernius, does that mean you're black?
Yes, I will be the only Tucker that is black.
Hey, I know it's Asian.
I
love Raph. He's so nice.
Yeah.
He's the one that told me about the Nintendo store. My mom was like, why did you listen to him?
Yeah.
Because at New York.
New York, New York.
Stop rubbing your head.
I was gonna rub his head too.
Talkington.
Right at the mouth.
Yeah. So.
Right in
Yeah,
the
but
three-
thankfully this is the old version.
I was like, wait a second. Because it's right in the
You
ears.
sure? You sure? Not white? I never would have guessed.
I don't know, I mean, when you get ashy, it's debatable.
Hey, you're
Let
not
me touch
wrong.
the squishy.
Yeah, go ahead and touch the squishy. But
Yeah,
yeah,
touch the
so
squishy.
that one, I'm actually ordering in the
Yes.
visor and
Squishy.
after.
Are you doing
From
one of
iPod?
those pre-molded, or the
Icon.
same ones I got you?
No, I'm doing one of the pre-molded.
Pre-molded one. Icon props on Etsy is amazing. I love them. I recommend them to everybody. He's like, once you do the
Oh my
order,
god, that's darling.
once you do the order, he ships almost immediately. Like
Oh,
it says,
incredible.
like 2 weeks, but you get it in days.
Yeah.
Like Icon props on Etsy, recommended.
Yeah.
Get it in
Carolina
days, a
wash
Tucker
and a
guarantee.
Tucker.
It's a Tucker
Well, it's just a
guarantee.
quality visor, too. Like, hot glue. The super glue won't work, it'll take the finish off, and I found out the hard way, but the hot glue getting in, I was like,
I am the
yeah.
last person who should be Tucker.
So I've already got a couple ideas and.
Yeah, say hey chicka bum bum.
Oh crap!
empty. I threw it out. I've been itching to redo Halo 3 so bad. Like, refinish it with everything I know now, blah, blah, blah. And I was sitting there like,
That's my
son of a
favorite
bitch,
Halo.
I'm gonna have to go back and deal with that stupid
itching
kid and
Halo?
trying to figure out the old paint
Halo
and blah, blah, blah. I found a can of paint in my sewing room when I was purging that room.
Purging it?
There's
That's
a game at what's that called? Player One?
Ready Player One?
Ready Player One arcade at Southtown Mall.
Oh no, that's called Round One. The arcade, like, building is
arcade.
Round One.
Round One.
Fire Team
Yeah,
Raven
it-
is so fun.
There's a Halo game where you get 4 players.
Yeah, I've played it before.
Freaking, we beat it.
Yeah, I've played it over at Dave and Buster's.
It's
I
fun.
didn't know that game still
We
existed.
looked at the price of it. You can buy it yourself.
Yeah.
50 grand.
No.
Yeah.
Huh?
Starting.
Starting.
70,000.
No, you thought it was 50.
70.
Where'd I get 50 from?
I guessed 50,000. I was like, this is probably 50,000 bucks for the whole machine. Then I looked it up and it was $70,000.
Yeah. That was the game that Dave and Buster's was hitting us up about coming through inside our armor and playing the game.
Why did I not hear about this?
Oh my god! How many times did I put this over inside our team chat?
Don't ask me, I don't remember anything.
This was like well over like a year and a half
And did
ago.
no one agree to do it?
Everyone was just like, oh, well, I mean, we've got to go and get our armor ready and da-da-da-da-da. That's what I was constantly dealing with.
Was my armor ready?
Yes, but you'd still basically kind of been... You were in your very grouchy phase.
When am I not in my grouchy phase?
It was definitely at an all-time high.
I don't know, that last grouchy phase. That was a bad one.
Yeah,
Which
so,
grouchy phase?
regardless-
Yesterday?
No. No.
Yeah.
Grouchy
Whole thing,
phase.
but yeah, like that is a ridiculously fun game, and it really requires a lot of teamwork. And
We played footsies.
yeah,
We're dating.
I know. But no, it's like...
What, you want us to start making out?
No.
On camera?
Definitely not.
Hey, babe.
I thought you were
I'll
saying-
buy you chicken nuggets
I'm full.
later.
No.
I thought you show you
Can
Mr.
we
Washington.
not have the awkwardness of this conversation plus also the mention of chicken nuggies?
Chicken nugs!
This is how we get the views.
I thought you were saying playing footsie is how you become a team, like team building footsie, not like a couple thing. It's like I've never done that. Oh.
So, like I
Sorry,
said,
go ahead.
there's not too much kind of going up in our very recent future as far as like some of the stuff. Like I do know.
I've never heard the phrase recent future.
Shut up.
I'm sorry. I've never heard that.
It's an 80s
Fine,
sci-fi
our
show.
near future.
80s sci-fi show. Recent future.
Right.
Previously.
It's like we've got quite a few games coming out. We still really need to go and all meet up and then play some Halo. Especially since Reach just came out. I've been dying to play with you all.
I'm terrible at Halo.
Me too.
The worst.
I'm good. That's how, like, before, like, they tried playing and they couldn't get past the first level.
Yeah.
I'd join in, we beat the game.
Right. See, and it's one of those where it's like I've played every single Halo game that's come out, and I've played them on all difficulties, and I absolutely love them. I won't say that I'm good, but I can at least hold my own. But I really want to be able to go and play Lasso.
I'm wild card.
I know, and that scares me.
I'm strangely okay with the gravity hammer and the energy sword. So I can't have any long-range weapons when I play.
So you're telling me that
I just run around.
you're telling me you're great with the cheese weapons?
Are they cheese weapons?
You should just go, say cheese.
I don't know. I just
Cheers.
has
It's like, say cheese. Boom.
better.
Jalapeno.
If you were to tell me like, oh, I'm really great with the assault rifle, that would be something I'd be like, okay.
No, I'm not great at
Battle
anything,
rifle.
but I'm just
Damn.
less worse. Less worse.
Pew 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 pew
3-shot burst will take y'all out.
pew pew.
Absolutely great.
Pew pew. I'm trying
I
to
also
draw a
like to
smiley
pull the
face.
move where I jump and then I do the gravity hammer and I go slightly higher.
He can get the skulls.
I'm terrible at Halo. I
going to
don't.
play this game.
I'm not
very
good. I
soon.
want to be very
Maybe-
specific.
Maybe next weekend,
clear.
but that depends on if we can go and get all the PCs in one place again. So
All the
There's a
political
PC, there's a
correctness?
PC, there's a PC there.
yeah, our group. So there's a thing, but there you go. Like I'm looking forward to that. I know there's another couple like Towerfall videos and whatnot that are going to be coming.
Broforce, so we've got 2 more episodes of Star Wars, and then I'm gonna have Broforce.
Can we have those episodes first, or at least like maybe some Towerfall? Then we'll do a little bit more Star Wars, and then Broforce.
Maybe?
Come on, Broforce.
But yeah, we played Broforce, and what we did was we did it all in bro voices, and some of us really, really suck, and some of us missed it completely.
And went Hispanic accent.
So, did you make those clips yet? The audio clips?
I think I have made a few.
God.
Broda.
But yeah, it's you're going through, like, it's a right to left video game, and you have guns, you're shooting the enemies, and then you unlock other action heroes, but they all have bro in the name. Like, Blade was Brolade?
No, I think he was just Braid.
Braid?
Yeah, he was Braid, and then think of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and like Sylvester Stallone.
Mr. T.
Yeah.
Was it
It
based
was like,
off that one wrestler?
like one of them was like Rambo.
Yeah, we had the wrestler.
And Brominator.
Brominator. Yeah, I got him once, and then I completely killed myself.
Is it kind of like Castle Crashers? Just that kind of same format with the closer and further from the screen from left to right?
Kinda, sorta.
Kinda, sorta?
Yeah, I mean, it's your average just scroll, like your scroll screen
Oh,
and
okay.
whatnot, and then a little bit.
You gotta get to the
platformer,
chopper.
but yeah, like the entire game is every level. We probably finished every level in maybe like 3-4 minutes, if that.
Oh.
Depending if we could get past the rocks.
It's a whole damn thing. It was a whole damn thing.
And then I was
So-
out buying hair dye this entire time.
Yeah.
What do you need hair dye for?
So
When I was Ray, I needed to turn my hair brown, but I didn't want to dye it, so I got this weird mousse stuff that turned my hair brown temporarily.
I was
Right.
playing with Stefan's squishy.
yeah, you were.
Don't
And that-
squish.
See, also, there are games that we haven't shot yet. Like one that I'm working. I'm setting up with Candace and with Carly and whatnot. That I personally cannot wait for.
Neither can I.
Are we ever gonna do the pizza squad with the girls? Overcooked. That's what it is.
Was that
Yeah,
the one that everyone
yeah.
was yelling at Ray about? Or Candace was yelling about Ray?
Wait, do I have a video of it?
Ish. No, like we haven't necessarily shot that one because that one we still had other guys with, but no, like we still have to go and do the all female Overcooked, and then a couple other videos. So like there's a couple that I know we need to go and do, just because they're going to be fantastic. But yeah,
And some shorts.
and the shorts, a lot of different shorts.
I may have some very short shorts.
Yeah, some other things. So, definitely, like, I'm looking forward to those. What I would encourage all you guys out for, most of the stuff isn't going to kick in until January.
After
So,
winter.
some of it will happen at the beginning of January, other ones won't happen until the end. But regardless, definitely go and check out. One of the things that we are planning on doing is most of the stuff, we're actually going to release it to our Patreon first
Mm-hmm.
for a couple weeks. So, yeah, like, that
Couple
part.
weeks or just a week?
Some of the stuff might be a couple weeks.
You're gonna be on Patreon. You'll see it first
Mhm.
at www.patreon.com/crackbrain.
You're right. So yeah, like I would say if you haven't joined our Patreon, don't run out to go and do it just yet. As much as we would love it, don't worry about going doing it yet. But then once we really start getting all this stuff going, you guys are definitely gonna want to be around for that. So we've got a lot of like really really cool things. So that's about it over on my end. Anything else that you guys wanted right before we end things?
I found your theme song. I was watching Netflix, and I started watching Green Eggs and Ham, and the intro is, "Hey guitar player, watch me backflip. Watch me backflip. Let me work my magic," and that's the entire song.
Hey guitar player, watch
And then
me
it goes-
backflip.
And then it goes down, 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 down. Watch me backflip, and that's the whole song. Is let me work my magic and watch me backflip.
I want to see now. I really wish I could do backflips over in Tucker because I would not stop saying that all around our It's like, hey guitar player, watch me backflip, watch me backflip.
It was strangely good. I wasn't expecting that show to be that good, but I loved it so much. I have a YouTube songs playlist. It's like over 700 now.
I know. I've
And-
seen that playlist. It's ridiculous.
So if you were singing it as,
Have I sung it by
Tucker,
accident?
wouldn't it be Teal Legs and Ham?
Aqua legs and ham.
Same difference.
Have I sent
You
you that
didn't
song
hear
list?
me. Aqua legs and ham.
Hey, Aqua That is. The ham is right on that upper part, so.
Ah, now I'm listening.
Why do you listen to him? You never listen to me.
It's because I'm black.
It's that 200-foot dong that's squishing right now.
It's because I don't hear.
Stop talking about my dick.
Talk about my dick.
My dick.
My dick.
My dick.
Stefan's better than the rest of us. We just have to accept it. There's nothing we can do. We just have to say.
One time I looked at Brandon and I said, Stefan, one time I looked at Brandon and I said, if ich liebe dich is I love you in German, what is ich liebe dick? And he just looked at me like he wanted to crash the car.
I missed all of that. All of that went right over my head. I
Good.
don't know the joke at all.
Good.
Please
It's okay.
We will explain it to you after the podcast.
It isn't a
In a
joke.
Stefan explains moment.
You're not wrong. So thank you guys for joining this episode of the Crack Brain Podcast. We might be live streaming again by next week. I don't know. A lot of it is honestly based off of like our internet and what's going on over here. But yeah, we'll have more information then. So
Let me work my
to
magic.
round out, I'm your host Stefan.
I'm Carly.
I'm Needle Dick.
Brandon.
And I'm Mason. Hello. I enjoy being here.
Yes. We like you here, Mason. We like you here.
Hey.
I can play with your squishy.
Don't
He's gonna
play
play with my squishy while I get up. Ah!
That's for
And go
after
and turn
the
off
podcast. That's you don't do that during. You get flagged for that.
am playing with your Needle Dick. Needle Dick.
Ow!
Needle
Brandon
Dick.
Peck, he's got the pecs. Da 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 da.